You're listening to the Fit Bottom Girls podcast, the only podcast for active, athletic, and adventurous women and those who aspire to be. We've got your back as you navigate the ups and the downs of motherhood, midlife, and menopause. I'm your host, Allison Hylett, here to remind you that female isn't fragile. I'm a strength, conditioning, and nutrition coach who's trained hundreds of women to achieve their goals to get fit, lift heavy, go the distance, and feel like a badass in every area of their lives. Each week, you'll hear from me and some of our awesome guests as we educate and empower you during each stage of your fitness journey, whether you're already crushing it, fighting to get back out there, or starting from day one. So friends, let's get into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fit Bottom Girls podcast. With me today on the podcast is Karin Weinstein. Karin is one of our amazing content creators here at FBG. She is a certified yoga teacher, mindfulness meditation teacher, and a personal trainer who specializes in helping pre, peri, and postmenopausal women improve and maintain physical and mental resilience as they age. She has a strong focus on osteoporosis prevention and bone health, and has helped her clients achieve measurable increases in bone mineral density. And that's exactly why she's here with me today. As women, we've long been told that weight-bearing exercise is key for bone health. But the scientific research on bone density improvements actually points towards something a little bit different and a lot more specific. And that's why Karin and I, as personal trainers, are seeing an uptick in otherwise active women who are being blindsided by a low bone density diagnosis because they thought they were doing enough to preserve their bone health. So today, Karin and I are talking about the specific lifestyle changes, so nutrition and exercise, that women can focus on to reduce their risk for osteoporosis. Let's do this. Welcome, Karin. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
We are here to talk today about a topic that many women don't give much thought to until their doctor tells them there's a problem. And that is bone health and osteoporosis prevention. I did a little bit of digging this morning in preparation for this conversation. And according to the National Osteoporosis Foundation, approximately 54 million Americans, so that's half of all adults age 50 and older, have low bone density, placing them at increased risk of breaking a bone. So other than that staggering statistic, why should women of all ages be concerned with their bone health?
Oh, because about 60% of your capacity for bone happens before you hit young adulthood. So for most women, that's 25 to 30. Men, it can be a little bit older. But basically, the most bone you're ever going to gain in your entire life happens by the time you hit young adulthood. And then, of course, for women who are going to go through menopause, we had this other marker that we're heading toward also, where estrogen has a huge amount to do with how well we lay down bone. And as the estrogen decreases, once we go through menopause, it becomes a little bit harder to maintain our bone density. So the more we can do before we hit menopause, the better off we'll be.
How do we know that our bone health is in trouble?
It usually starts with a DEXA scan or a bone that's broken from a fall that shouldn't normally break a bone. That usually sends off the alarms where then maybe a doctor would have a DEXA scan done. Most women aren't having the first DEXA scan done until after they've already gone through menopause, which for some women is too late, especially if there's family history, especially if you're on things, antidepressants and other drugs that might affect your ability to build bone. And there are a whole bunch of them out there. So that's something that people really need to be mindful of and maybe should be having a conversation with their doctor about. My candidate for an early screening based on all of these factors. But really what I find is that most of the people I work with were shocked that they had osteoporosis or osteopenia. And that's because if you think about how we go in for our checkup every year and the doctor's like, do you exercise? Check. And most women are like, oh yeah, I walk 3 miles every single day. And then I do yoga twice a week. And the doctor's like, great, you're active. Keep doing what you're doing. That's weight-bearing activity. And nobody thinks twice about it. And really, we should be asking questions like, are you strength training? Are you impact training? So it ends up just blindsiding people. And that's the story I get. And that's how I got into this. I was primarily a yoga teacher. I think like a lot of us, our prime focus is on yoga. And then I've always attracted an older clientele. And they were slowly coming to me and saying, "Hey, I just got this diagnosis, but I've been doing yoga for 20 years. I don't understand how this is possible." And so it's just hard to explain to people it's not just weight bearing activity, it's a
Yeah.
very particular kind of weight bearing activity.
Yeah. Not all types of exercise are designed to meet certain goals. If you're really worried about your heart health, you want to focus on cardiovascular exercise. If you're
Right.
really worried about losing your muscle mass, then you want to be strength training. Or if you bone density, there are things, specific stressors on the body that signal bone remodeling or bone strengthening. And not all exercise does those things.
And we've all kind of been taught that it's just the weight bearing activity. So
Mhm.
most women just think that walking is enough and not.
So, the diagnosis that women will get can be osteopenia or osteoporosis. Can you
Right.
tell us a little bit about those diagnoses and what is the difference between them?
Sure. At first, it's important to point out that bone remodeling is a normal process. So we want old or damaged bone to be taken away, it gets resorbed or broken down, and then it gets replaced by new bone matrix. And then what happens with osteopenia and osteoporosis is there's a higher rate of breakdown than there is depositing new bone matrix. Osteopenia is a precursor for osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is a little bit more severe, so bones are more brittle, and both of them set you up for a higher risk of fragility fractures.
Yeah, and that's important because the statistics around fragility fractures are not super positive. When we look at the mortality rates and functionality after that type of injury, they're not great prognosis from that point in
No.
time. I had a stress fracture of my femoral neck a couple days after my 30th birthday. I wasn't able to weight bear on it for weeks. And in that time period, I was losing my muscle mass. I was losing bone mass because I wasn't able to do any weight bearing. There were a lot of issues alongside the pain of this injury.
Course.
But when it happens to you later in life, it's a much bigger challenge to overcome those obstacles. You think about a year of not doing bone building or strength building exercises, it's going to severely compromise your quality of life when you're in your 60s, 70s, or 80s versus your 30s.
Absolutely. And with this goes the fact that as we age, we also have sarcopenia happening, muscle loss. So when this happens to an older person, especially if it's someone who's more sedentary, they don't have the muscle there. And then they're only going downhill after the fracture. So especially with hip fractures.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So there's this idea where we should treat our bone health like a bank account, that there are
Mhm.
certain things that we can do both in that period of young adulthood and pre-menopause that will be making deposits into our bone bank and allowing us to really maximize the potential and the capacity that we have through those time periods. So, what are some of the things that are really helpful for women to consider in terms of their bone health leading up to those time periods?
Impact training and strength training, those are really the big two. It's staying active and it's encouraging children to be active. We really need kids to be outside and playing. And we know that that's taken a huge shift in the last, couple of decades, really, with the amount of time they're spending online, the way that schools have changed, how they handle recess and things like that. Kids just are not as active as they used to be.
Mhm.
And so they're already behind the eight ball by the time they're hitting young adulthood. So I suspect that this is going to be a problem that is only going to increase because of that.
Yeah. A really common myth, especially among Gen X women, is that walking, yoga, and Pilates are enough exercise and that they're beneficial for bone health. So, talk to me about
Yeah, when it comes to those things, they are weight bearing exercise, but it's bearing your own body weight, and your body's already used to bearing your own body weight because you do it all the time. And your bones get a little bit bored. They're only going to get strong enough to do the things that you ask them to get strong enough to do. And if all you ever do is hold your own body weight, that's how strong your bones are going to get. And so we need to give them a little bit of additional stimulus in the form of impact training and strength training. Strength training, we need to bear load. We need to not only bear load, but that needs to progress over time
that.
because once your bones get strong enough to handle whatever loads you're giving them, now you need to give them some new input. And that might be in the form of changing an exercise or adding more sets or more reps, but really that becomes time prohibitive over time.
Yeah.
And really what we want to be doing is lifting fewer sets of a higher weight. And then the impact training doesn't really have to be anything huge either. We're talking things like foot stomps or heel drops. I think when people think of impact training, they picture these plyometric boxes that people have to jump up onto and jump back down from. When working with someone who's 65, they're like, I can't do that. And it's just, no, just walk around, stomp a little bit, do a few hops in place, jump a little bit. And all of that is so beneficial. And what's nice is it lays down bone where we need bone to be laid down. Because the osteoporosis drugs, they slow down the rate at which we are losing bone, but they're not helping us to build bone back up. So
Yeah.
we need to tell the bones where to build that strength.
Yeah. And I think it's important to just highlight one of the things you said here, which was we need to give our bones a reason to get stronger. And that comes in the form of mechanical stress on the tissue. And so the other thing that's really important, is to think about many directions. The bone matrix is not just like a linear pattern, it is
Yeah.
a very complicated, intricate web of bone material. And the more directions and capacity and strength you have in all directions in the bone matrix, the more strength you have to that structure. So it's not just moving forward and back, which would be like walking, but moving side to side, moving in the diagonal, moving in multiple directions is really important for stressing the bone in a way that lays down that multi-directional matrix.
Yeah. I tell people to think of things like hopscotch, things we did when we were kids.
Yeah.
Where you're hopping forward, backward, or I'll tell people to imagine that there's a clock on their floor and just take turns randomly hopping to different numbers so you're getting that stress at different angles, because that's one of the things we know that bones love.
Yeah. Yeah. Your bones are like, oh, if you're ever going to do that again, I need to be strong enough to do it. And they lay down this insurance policy to make sure
Exactly.
it's there next time. So even if you are taking osteoporosis medications, which are slowing down the breakdown, you still need to be doing enough to increase that stimulus to actually be laying down more bones. So in terms of what activities do build bones, we're talking about strength training, specifically lifting heavier loads for lower reps and sets. So the opposite of what women's fitness or women's strength training has been, it's strength training from a different perspective. It's thinking about bigger
Yeah.
loads, less reps on them. And then impact, which, like you said, it's not just box jumps on 30-inch boxes. There's a lot that goes into that impact. But from the previous generations, we inherited this narrative around as you get older, you should take the intensity and the impact down. And then that made the problem a little bit worse because obviously what we're talking about are exercises that have a little bit of intensity in terms of impact and in terms of the actual weight you're lifting. It's going to feel more intense than doing this all day with 3-pound weights. And then when they get an osteopenia or osteoporosis diagnosis, or they're leading up to that, there's bone density concerns happening, that they're often told to avoid certain types of exercises that we should actually be progressively introducing them to in order to slow the bone density loss.
Absolutely. I think part of it is we live in a litigious society. I think doctors are a little bit worried about getting sued. So I think they take the absolutely safest course sometimes when they advise their patients. So they're saying no more bending, don't pick anything up. And it really puts so much fear in the women who are being diagnosed with this. And then they don't know what to do because yesterday they were lifting up laundry baskets and today all of a sudden they're afraid to. And that's the exact opposite of the messaging that we need to be giving women right now. And the other thing is there's a large lag time sometimes between the research that's out there and how long it takes to trickle down into clinical practice. Because a primary care physician, their focus is very broad. They're not focused just on osteoporosis. And when they're in medical school, no one's really teaching them how exercise fits into keeping people healthy. They don't know how to program for their patients.
Right.
So that's something you have to go outside of the doctor's office for.
Yeah, recognizing that your doctor's wheelhouse is not necessarily every aspect of your health. So it is important to remember that this is where personal trainers and physical therapists who are working in this field, who are familiar with osteopenia, osteoporosis, who are educated on these can be really helpful because to your point about the box jumps versus just heel drops or stomping, there are levels of progression. And it's just like working in therapeutic setting with somebody who has knee pain. I wouldn't immediately having you doing loaded deep knee bends. Or if you want to learn how to deadlift, you don't go in and try to pick up a 300-pound barbell. You have to start at a level that your body is capable of and slowly increase that stress in a way that your body is getting the impetus to get stronger. And that is in the world of physical therapy and personal trainers. That's something that we specialize in. So making sure you're talking to the right person is always really important when it comes to your health.
Yeah, and asking too if somebody knows how to work with someone with osteopenia or osteoporosis, because that's the other feedback I've gotten from clients is they were working with personal trainers, but it was someone who just had them doing very general exercises. And a lot of times they're missing out on the components that are really needed as a focus for women with osteoporosis and osteopenia.
Hey, you. I wanted to press pause on this episode for a second to talk about your fitness goals. You know, those sweet dreams of being more active and feeling athletic and confident and doing epic, adventurous shit. Or maybe you just feel like you're getting older, because we're all getting older. And you, like me, never want to give up on carrying all the groceries into the house in one shot or picking up that heavy Amazon box without worrying that you're going to throw your back out. I know you're busy. You're probably listening to this episode while multitasking. Oh yeah, I'm on to you. And the biggest thing that's stopping you from getting strong and fit is knowing how to use your workout time most effectively. Like exactly which exercises are worth your time, when to do them, and the number of sets and reps to get to your goals. You probably also tried other fitness apps and programs out there, only to feel like they weren't right for your needs. You want a program that has it all: strength, power, cardio, mobility, and recovery, all built right in without spending your whole life in the gym. And you want experienced coaches around to answer your questions and a community at your back to help you stay motivated and inspired. Look, I've been coaching women for a long time now, and the truth is that you don't need another fad diet or complicated, time-consuming workout routine to support you as you age. You just need to train smarter with simple, progressive workouts and a plan that's designed for your body and your life, whether you're navigating motherhood, midlife, or menopause. And if this sounds like exactly what you've been missing, I invite you to join Stronger 365, a progressive strength, power, and conditioning training membership for women like you who are ready to stop winging it and take their training to the next level with more structure and support. And the best part? This program has 3 different options, so you can choose your own fitness adventure based on your goals, how much time you have to train, and what equipment you have, whether you've got access to a full gym or, like me, work out at home. And it's run by me, Allison Hyland, and my awesome team at Miles to Go Athletics. Head over to the show notes for all the details and to join our membership community. And as an FBG, your first 2 weeks are on me. And now, let's get back to the episode. Yeah, because the world of health and fitness is huge, and usually people will niche into what they're most interested or feel most skilled at. So they'll follow the research around that particular area. So if you go to a personal trainer who specializes in fat loss, they're going to be following the research on fat loss and what's most effective for that. They're not necessarily staying up to date on the latest research around osteoporosis. So there are very different types of workouts that you would do for depending on what your goals are. In that vein, there is a protocol for prevention of osteoporosis or management of osteoporosis or osteopenia. And it really comes down to this idea of progressive overload and exercise application. So talk me through what that means.
So for me, it means not using machines. It means using free weights, because the benefits that we get from free weights far outweigh the benefits that we can get from machines for someone with osteopenia or osteoporosis. And that is in part because when you're using free weights, there's a shifting center of gravity that your body has to adapt to. So that helps to improve our proprioception and our balance and to prevent falls. In addition to that, we need something called axial loading. So we actually need load that goes down through our axis, which is our spine. And the spine is one of the most vulnerable areas for somebody with osteopenia and osteoporosis. And that's a really tough one because people get worried about compression fractures and they associate that with load. But really, some of that has to do with posture, with having a slightly rounded posture that puts a little bit more load on the front of the vertebra. So as long as we're maintaining a nice neutral spine as we're going through these movements, they're safe for somebody who has osteopenia and osteoporosis. They just have to know how to do them and how to approach them. And that axial loading, that's one of the things I get a lot of feedback about too, is people have been working on machines. And because you're seated and you're doing chest press out in front of you, only your arms are moving. Nothing else is getting any kind of load down through your spine, your pelvis. into the heads of your femurs. And that's where we need all that load to be.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a certain amount of the muscles and tendons pulling on the bone as they move. And that's one type of mechanical stress that's being
Yep.
applied. But then it's also the actual pushing down on the bones, the extra gravity that the weight gives us that forces them to have to be a little bit stronger as well. So when you put somebody in a machine and you take away the weight kind of pushing on them or down on them or compressing them, then you lose one avenue of that mechanical stimulus and you get slightly decreased benefits as a result of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is why astronauts lose bone density.
Mhm.
They are missing the force of gravity and then any other forces that are applied to their body.
Yeah.
So we just need to make sure we're applying the forces in the right direction and in the right way.
Yeah. 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 I love that too, because that is one of the concerns, that fragility that women feel when they go to their doctor and their doctor's like, basically just don't move. So, like, no,
Wrap it in bubble wrap.
no, that is the worst thing to do. It's the lack of movement, the lack of stress on your body that's created this situation. We need to leverage your body's capacity to adapt and grow and get stronger, but we have to give it a reason to, right? We have to give it a reason to. So I think it's important too, because when people go into the gym, the most approachable thing is the machines. They're like, oh, I'll go to this machine and the trainer will show me how to do it. And I feel like I can do it unsupervised. Maybe that's a good entry point, but that is not where we want you to end up, because you are missing that stability component, the proprioception of not falling. But also when your body has to adjust to a load that is moving, that can move freely, you're getting a little bit more of that bone matrix happening in multi directions rather than just in the direction that you're pushing the plate.
Absolutely. You're calling on so many more muscle fibers to help stabilize you. And
Yes.
that's for fall prevention. That's huge.
Yeah. Even if you feel most comfortable starting with machines, great. But we want you to be working away from those into free weights as you progress.
I often will start with no weight at all. I'll just introduce people to the movement, holding a dowel or just using their own body weight. And the other thing I do is I'll remind women about what they're already lifting that's probably
Yes.
heavier than they think. I'll talk to somebody and they'll say, oh, I'm really worried about picking up this 10-pound dumbbell. And they watched their grandkids yesterday. And I'll say, how old are your grandkids? And they're like, oh, it's 3 and 7. Do you pick them up? Yeah. How much do they weigh? Oh, 45 pounds. And you're like, you're already
Yes.
lifting this weight.
Yes. I had a podcast episode with Trisha Durham, and she said the same thing. She's like, the numbers on the dumbbells freak people out, but those numbers are still leading you to underload yourself, because what you're capable of picking up when you just pick up the Amazon box or you just pick up your grandkids or you lug your vacuum cleaner up the stairs, what you're capable of picking up right now is way more than a dumbbell.
100%. And it happens all the time. Yeah. A KitchenAid mixer weighs 25
Yes.
pounds, 30
Yes.
pounds.
Women today are picking up things that are much heavier than those dumbbells you're afraid of.
Yeah. And once they get over that hump, they surprise themselves. And that's the most beautiful thing to me, is just seeing someone really embrace their own strength. And there's so much confidence that comes from that. I was working with a client who just told me she went away on a trip, and it's the first time she was able to put her bag in the overhead compartment on the plane. And it's those little wins that just are everything, because that is independence for people. They don't feel like someone has to carry their grocery bags from the grocery store to their car for them. They can do it themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is so key. So much of our quality of life and our confidence comes from our ability to have autonomy and to with independence. And as we start to get older, if we're not taking care of ourselves as well as we could, we start to see this like chipping away at that quality of life, that ceiling of independence and autonomy and being able to do the things we want to do. I have a lot of clients with that same story. You worked all of these years, putting all of this money away in your retirement, and then you get to this place in life where you're finally able to enjoy your life, but your quality of life is so diminished by not doing simple things to invest in your retirement health as much as you're investing in your retirement account.
Yeah, it's a physical investment. It's an investment in your physical health versus
Yep.
your financial.
Each of these bone building workouts is a deposit into that retirement account of your health, of your ability to still be able to move around without pain or worrying that you're going to break. I think
Or even falling, because your muscles are protecting your bones. So even if you do sustain a fall, then you've got this support system buffering your bones.
Yep.
And I think we have to remind people too that maintaining the same bone density is a win, because as we age, we naturally lose bone. That's the tendency, that's the trend that we're in. So if we can actually maintain our bone density, we're on the plus side, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, the baseline is down.
Exactly.
So if we can keep it flat, then we're winning.
Because people sometimes get frustrated. They'll go and get a DEXA scan and then they'll get another one and it'll show no change. I'm like, that's great because your trend was this way. Now we just leveled it out. There's
Yep.
no more loss. That's a good thing.
Yeah, and when people get DEXA scans done, they're typically getting scanned their lumbar spine, the neck of the femur, and then the total hip.
Occasionally the wrist is the other one I see sometimes.
Okay. So the types of exercises we're really looking for, as we mentioned, is lowering the number of repetitions you're doing and
Yes.
increasing the weight of what you're doing. So what are some of the important basic exercises from a strength perspective that you program that are really beneficial for those areas that show up on the DEXA scale?
I'm always doing squats. I'm always doing some kind of deadlift. I am always trying to do a staggered stance or some single leg work, whether that's step ups, split squats, lunges, things like that. I am trying to do upper body things where it's adding that compressive force down through the whole body. So it might be something like overhead presses, which are great just for maintaining your ability to put something on a high shelf. So we're talking about things that translate into functional capacity. And then doing things like farmer's carries, where you're just holding weights and walking and allowing those compressive forces to do their work. I'll do a lot of lateral movement because we really want to target the head of the femur and the hip. So we'll be doing some banded side steps, things like that, some side planks. I usually start with body weight just because it's something that feels a little bit more comfortable for people.
Sure.
Push-ups. I love the stability that brings to the entire body. As we age, people start having wrist issues and shoulder issues and knee issues. And we kind of work around all that because there's always some alternative for something if there's an issue coming up.
Yeah.
But I find that a lot of times those things actually start to go away a little bit once we get stronger. The
Yep.
pain starts to decrease and then we can do even more.
Yep. It's great how that works.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome.
So from an impact perspective, people have this terrified reaction to the idea of power training or plyo training or jump training. There's many different things that it's called, but essentially it's introducing some impact into the bone. But if somebody is coming in and they've not been doing hopping, impact, running, those sorts of things, what are some of the ways that they can dip their toes into the impact training that would result in better bone density?
Yeah, I'm usually starting with things like foot stomps because I find that they're the least intimidating thing to do. Foot stomps, heel drops. I like foot stomps better because we can start to do that on different angles. So we're not just stomping out in front of us or stomping to the side, behind. Those are really the two places that I start. And then from there, I might have them do a little double foot jumping up and down. We can even do that with their hands on a desk or on a chair so that it's not even bearing their full body weight yet, but just allowing their feet, their knees, their ankles, their hips to start getting used to a little bit of jumping. And then just slowly increasing that over time. I mentioned the clock before. That's one of the things that I love doing with people. I love to do a lot of like lateral movement because that helps with agility. We need that muscle power, the ability to move quickly so that if we do stumble or trip on something, we can swing that leg out and get it down to catch us. So I like to practice movements like that because that's more real world applicable. People tell me, oh, I have great balance, and they'll stand in tree pose for a minute. And I'm like, well, that's great, but we tend to not fall from tree pose.
Yeah. Yes.
We're usually falling when we're moving somewhere or carrying something. It's usually when we're talking, we're distracted, we're carrying something in our arms. That's usually when we are experiencing a fall.
Yeah.
So we want to practice those scenarios
Yeah.
because that's what's going to really help us.
Yeah. And that second level of the pogo hops and things like that, really good for a lot of reasons, for the tendon resilience, the fast twitch muscle fibers, which, like you said, is really important if you're going to fall. So how many people have felt that they've pulled a muscle when they sneeze or when they go to get out of bed or something? Having tendons and muscles that are able to fire quickly and recover from that is really important. But holding onto the chair, that's a really good one. And I've used where you take a resistance band, the pull-up bar, and you bounce. So it also takes some of your weight away. So you can start to get that feeling and the ability of the plantar fascia and the Achilles tendon to really support that type of springy movement if you're not used to that yet. So there's lots of
Absolutely.
ways. Like if you're working with somebody who knows what they're doing, we have many
Oh,
ways.
yeah.
Yeah.
I can get really creative when I need to be.
Totally, definitely. Great. Talked about a lot of different things on this. Is there anything else that you wanted to add? Any key takeaways?
For women to start investing in their health in this specific way. I think that we've got cardio. I think women have been taught to do cardio and lift light weights.
Mhm.
And we just need to shift that a little bit. So if you've got the cardio locked down, okay, now it's really time to focus your attention on some heavier strength training. And understanding that doesn't mean you walk in the gym on the first day and lift up two 25-pound
Yep.
dumbbells. That might start with two 5-pound dumbbells, but the idea is that we're gradually increasing over time. So, yeah, nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah. I found that over the last couple decades, it was a selling point to label an exercise routine as low impact. And there's definitely a place for we don't always want to be subjecting ourselves to impact. And we don't always want to be jumping straight into high impact. But low impact as a selling point for women who are aging is not as positive as it sounds. We do
Absolutely.
need to be incorporating some appropriate impact for our bodies and not always just avoiding it as if it's, I see it like with yoga and Pilates, that's a big selling point. And those are great exercises. I love all forms of exercise. I think it's sending this message to women that low impact is better, and it's not.
It's one of the reasons why I actually love that pickleball has taken off because older people seem to be drawn to that. And that's really getting us that impact from different
Mhm.
angles. There's a lot of agility in that. And it's very much like dance. I'll often recommend dance to people for the
Yep.
same reason, because you're moving your body in all of these different directions. It's working on dynamic balance. There are so many things that go into that. So also choosing the cardio that you're doing wisely, that
Yep.
has a lot to do with it as well.
Yeah, I have a client who's in her 50s and shuffle dance is what she took up. And that's her cardio. She also does strength training, but it's intense and there's impact and it's in all directions and it's your body is moving and your foot is hitting the floor in different patterns. And so it's
Yeah.
really, really great for that. So if you're like, you're thinking like, "Ah, I don't want to run. You don't have to run. There's
No,
so many ways to get impact in. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. As a nutrition coach, I always think about making sure that you're eating enough, that you're not losing bone density because you're not fueling your body enough. I also think about eating a variety of nutrient dense. They have a lot of nutrient density that hasn't been extracted during the processing. So fruits, veggies, legumes, nuts, seeds, grains, lean proteins, the more of those that you can get, the more calcium, vitamin D, protein, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, the things that are really important for bone building from an intake perspective. And then the other one that comes to mind for me is really eating enough protein. So really women want to be getting around 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. It's higher in trained athletes, but 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day distributed throughout the day. We think about it as muscle, but also it's building blocks of a human being. So that's really important. And the other
Absolutely.
one that really comes to mind from a nutritional perspective is gut microbiome diversity, which is an interesting one because we now know that diversity in your gut bugs helps improve signaling for bone remodeling and maintaining bone density. And a lot of women in the perimenopause to menopause transition are struggling with that gut health component, primarily from not eating as well as they should. And so their gut bug diversity is low and there isn't enough there to signal bone density improvements or remodeling. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your experience and your expertise with this. This has been super helpful.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Allison. I was so looking forward to this.
Yeah. So people can find you on your website, your Instagram. I will link to those in the show notes so people can find you. You also have a free osteoporosis webinar that we'll link to in the show notes. Tell us what we can expect from that.
It's about a half hour, 35-minute presentation, and it really gets very specific into the research behind why we do what we do. We're talking about fall prevention, we're talking about osteoporosis, bone building, and all of that. I think it's really helpful because it lets people understand why trainers like us are taking the approach that we're taking. And
Mhm.
it's because there's so much research behind it. And again, that hasn't always filtered down yet to clinical practice. So the research is there. And what I really like about it is it's demonstrated that women can do this. There are really no negative impacts. They've done research with women who were at very, very high risk for fracture and nobody got hurt.
Yeah, I don't think people know that every time I talk about that field of research, where they actually tested this to see if it would increase the injury, and it didn't. It's amazing, right? And it's cool that people can find that information and really understand the why behind the specific type of training that we're doing if osteoporosis prevention is important to your bone health is important. And then you also do the one-on-one individualized strength programming for women with osteoporosis. So tell me about that and who is a good fit for that.
I wouldn't even wait until you're diagnosed. I think that if you've got a family history, if your mom or your dad had osteoporosis, it's time to start doing something about that now, especially if you're brand new to strength training. If this is something that you've avoided your whole life because there's something about it, you're intimidated by the idea of going to a gym and walking in and just starting. These are the people that I really love introducing to this world because I just get such a thrill watching them grow at an age where people often feel like they've stopped growing.
Yeah, it is cool.
Yeah. Very cool.
All right, this was great. Thank you so much for being here, Karin.
Thank you, Allison. My pleasure.
And that's a wrap for this week's episode of the Fit Bottom Girls podcast. But don't worry, we're dropping new episodes every Thursday. In the meantime, head over to the show notes for all the links from today's episode, or go to fitbottomedgirls.com/podcast to catch up on past episodes. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next week.